Well, I'm sitting here at the Fugard Theatre where Reverend Frank Chikane, former Director General in the President's Office, just launched his latest book, The Things That Could Not Be Said. Of course, this follows on from his previous book, 8 Days in September, where he told the story of the removal of former President Thabo Mbeki. This story, however, talks about his own perspective inside the presidency and some of the contentious calls and policy decisions that were made during the Mbeki era. What follows are some of those stories around the contentious calls and policy decisions as made during the Mbeki era in a very novel interview done by Minister Trevor Manuel.
I must start the conversation by saying a few words. Firstly, I just want to remind you that last year we did 8 days in September. And I did say that when I wrote the book, when we reached chapter 17, the publisher said, "You've got 2 books in one." And so I broke it into 2 books. And the first, it's about the removal of Mbeki. And this book basically deals with the issues we had to grapple with in government. But I thought I must bring the old book, which has been republished, that's No Life of My Own. This was done in the 80s. I wrote it from underground. There's a time when a state of emergency was declared, 1986. Just finished the treason trial 6 months earlier, you get acquitted, and 6 months later, you qualify to be detained again. And we thought, no, we're not going to make ourselves available for the game. And so we went underground. So I wrote this underground. I'm telling you this story because at that time it was like underground literature smuggled to London to be published there first, and then published in South Africa much later. And when I did 8 days, I felt at that time the tension. Not the same experience of the 80s. And this book, the current book, really completes that journey from 8 days. And I'm hoping that you'll enjoy the reading of the book. But I think I'm not going to make too many comments. I'll get engaged with my comrade here. Trevor Manuel. I won't call you minister for today. If I call him minister, I must start by saying I did not break the secrecy law. Okay.
Well, in other lives, we're both ministers of a special type. Frank, we call him Muruti, Reverend. That's his ministry, and I still have the other one. But thank you very much. I want to confess to you that I'm here on the wrong evening.
Yeah.
You see, Mervin's been trying to get me in as a stand-up comedian, and I thought I was appearing to
Yeah.
But let me at the onset ask people to read and engage with the book and also with the context. I'd said that as a friend and comrade, and I figure that it's at least 30 years that we've known each other.
That's a long time.
There are things we know and things we don't know, and I'd like to start the conversation by drawing together something that Mervyn had touched on. You see, in the minds of many people, and I would imagine many people here, spies are things of the distant past. They're about Matahari and Profumo, of the Cold War. They're not of the present, because the issues are not deemed to be of the present. But I think you draw attention to a very particular set of issues, and I'd like to touch on 3 issues that can be plated together in a single story, because context is fundamentally important. The first of these is the way in which stories are crafted, appearing to be official, and given the fact that we all use the same computers with the same fonts, You can, and the internet allows you to copy all kinds of things. Spying is actually a hell of a lot easier these days.
Yeah.
So that's one strand of issues. The second is in the context of Zimbabwe, there's a particular set of issues to deal with, and I'd like you to expand on this because Lancaster House was fundamentally important, but there was a commitment from a Tory government to finance land reform.
Land reform, yeah.
And when our friends in Labour came into government in 97, the deal was broken, and so there are two strands that actually interact in a very particular way. And the third strand, and one that we are frequently uncritical of, but I'm trying to provoke a discussion about this issue as well, is the media. Because in the way in which these stories are brought together, it's quite important to use the book to raise these issues, and I'd like to invite you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't know you'll go straight to Zimbabwe. But
No, I'm not going to Zimbabwe. You know, I'm getting there via intelligence and the press
and everything else. No, the point, I think it's what I try to deal with in the book, and this is the challenge about writing a book like this. I'm trying to tell the story, not the popular story. You know, the popular perspective, the media story. I'm trying to tell the story as I have experienced it. And you'll see when you read the book that it reflects that. Now, on this issue about Lancaster and the agreements, you know, there was a commitment there. The British government committed itself, and the United States supported that because they were around the table. They supported that. And the key issue was when the land restoration happens, they will pay for the land and Zimbabwe will pay for the improvements on the land. And that was delayed because of us in terms of negotiations in South Africa. And there's a story that I tell there, which I only heard after some time, that there was a discussion between Nyerere and Kaunda, Mugabe together, and O.R. Tambo, saying that you can't do the land restoration now because of the negotiations in South Africa. Otherwise, it's going to create a crisis for South Africa, delayed. So it got delayed until 98, and a conference was held to deal with this matter. And there was still a commitment. The commitment was made, we're going to do it. And then, of course, the Labour Party got into power. Quite young people who came in there. It was actually a young generation that took over. Forgot about the history and then talked about, no, they are corrupt, we can't give them the money. And then the hell broke loose, actually. And that particular story, it's never told because nobody really engages a story like that. And what we see, it's the violence that then happens, and then we address ourselves to the violence and violation of human rights and et cetera, et cetera. But actually the real issue was the land issue itself. But later, then you get the major countries getting involved, and this is where the issues about, you know, intelligence and security and that stuff comes in, which it's difficult to deal with in a book because I have to respect the law in terms of the knowledge that I have about what happened there, and the intentions and what people wanted to do. And that's about Zimbabwe. And from there on, we see the story from the perspective of the violence rather than from the perspective of the original. Then we went a step further and said, don't give them the money. Let's get the money via UN to pay for the land directly to the farmers. And that also went wrong because the person who was appointed to do that happened to be British. And it fell apart. And so then the veterans then occupy the land. I think that's really the issue I try to deal with, but I'm dealing more with the facilitation to make peace in that area.
Yeah, but let's take it
Yeah.
further, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've lived through interesting times, and some of these you touch on.
Yeah.
One of those was called the Browse Mole Report.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. It's something that created major havoc between us and some of our comrades. There were secret emails, and we didn't quite understand these issues. Now, in the context of the facilitation in Zimbabwe, firstly, there are letters and statements that purport to be from the presidency in South Africa that can't be traced. There are letters that are said to have been written to President Mbeki that can't be traced. And these then fuel stories in the media about how South Africa plays a role. Now, without breaking any of the secrecy, I mean, I'm just referring to what is in the book, not what I know.
Okay. No, I understand you. I understand you. I think when you read the book, you'll realize I deal with all those issues. People do talk about the spy stories and read about it, but they don't realize it happens during our time. And the Browse Mole Report, for instance, document was a major document produced within the Scorpions, who are supposed to actually be dealing with criminal activity, produce it, and then the document appears with COSATU. It surfaces with COSATU to become public. And the question is, how did it happen? Where did it come from, etc.? Then the 4 fake emails, which I call them fake.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, they appeared. And then they say they arrived in a brown envelope and there is no source for it. And I say, where is the source? And there is no source. But those emails write about us and other people, etc. In the case of Zimbabwe, in terms of the facilitation in particular, you would have a discussion here. Let me make Lesotho as an example, because I think Zimbabwe is too controversial. Would have a discussion here, and we arrive in Lesotho, we are facilitating. And the Basotho know what we're discussing. Now the Basotho don't have that capacity to do that, which means there's a bigger brother who listens through and informs. And then in the Zimbabwe case, you would have an agreement now, and tomorrow the agreement changes because they have not followed the particular interests of particular countries. And that's where, for me, it became important to look beyond just the ordinary discussion and say, who else has interest in this particular matter? Who's listening through? Who's handling whom? And I do deal with the DRC, for instance, which is the same as well. You arrange for a meeting in Sun City. The first people who check in are intelligence services of international entities into the hotels. And then they wait for the delegates there. And when the delegates arrive, they handle them. And so you're dealing with delegates, but in fact, you're dealing with other people beyond the delegates. And that's where I talk about farewell to innocence. Because there's a chapter here on farewell to innocence.
I can't work out why it took you so long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it becomes quite clear that these are not ordinary. Life is not as simple as people think. And that's where the media comes
Well,
in.
I want to just pick up on that. You see, when I read newspapers, I try and be selective.
Yeah.
So I'll read The Guardian and I'll read The Observer on Sundays. I don't read the Times of London. I don't read the Telegraph. I've kind of made some selection in my head about what I should read and for what reason. But one of the issues you pick up on is a rather interesting exchange the Guardian reporting.
Yeah.
And then when they are asked to explain, they say, no, it's reported in the South African media, who picked it up from the Guardian and then reported.
Yes.
And so there's a circle that you can't actually get to the end of.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I had to deal with. I mean, you'll remember, some of you will remember, the headline news about a document from South Africa, a report of Mbeki about the negotiations attacking Britain. And the headlines appear in Britain. And we track it down because we don't have this document. They're talking about a document we don't have. I produced the reports. We didn't have such a report. And even when they reported about it, it was a strange story. Then we tracked it down. And when we did our own investigation, we found that a stringer in Lusaka around the SADC meeting, a stringer first reports through the French net, the
AFP.
Yeah, AFP. First reports and says this document is Zimbabwean. Within 4 hours, it's in Reuters as Mbeki document. And then it hits London as Mbeki document. And the media in South Africa picks it from the wires and reports it as Mbeki documents. When we asked the Guardian, where did you get the story? No, we got it from South Africa. When we check with the South African media, no, they got it in the wires. And when you searched it backwards, you realize that there was an operation in Lusaka to feed in this information, to create tension between South Africa and Britain about this matter, and therefore negate the processes of negotiations in terms of our facilitation. At the end, I mean, we sat with Reuters. I had lots of discussions with them, and I said, show me the document. They say, no, we can't show you. So I said, okay, I'm going to find the document for you. I'll find the document, and I'll show you and say, this is the document you are using, and that document is not South African. And at the end, they agreed. In fact, it was false. And what I say in the book is that in the interest of the freedom of the media, we need to defend the media to make sure that they are not abused by intelligence services of other countries which have particular interests, who feed a story, and we pick it up as truth, and then we make headlines out of it.
You know, I don't want to hang on to this point, but it's very important.
Yeah.
In a world where we can source so much information from the internet, where people can conjure up their own ideas, and single-source journalism then becomes the order of the day, I think that there are a number of caveats that arise from this. But I want to move on to talk about something else that in many ways is quite personal, related in the book. You lived through a fairly deep trauma in 1989. I mean, you know, the idea that, well, getting ill, being detained, yeah, you know how to deal with it, becoming very ill, trying to deal with doctors who can't actually track what happened, and then finding yourself in Connecticut or somewhere, Wisconsin, and doctors then discover that you've been poisoned. Moves the mind because now you are on the verge of death. It's a big, big issue.
Yeah.
That's 1989. You lived through this stuff. You assiduously set out to try and find out. And I put it to you that by the time of the TRC, you'd formulated a story in your mind. So
I had some idea.
You had some idea.
Some idea where it could have come from. Yeah.
Multiply, a number of individuals are involved. They are from the security services. And whether they're instructed to do so or not, there has to be a frame of reference that says, I can't do this because it's wrong. They got engaged in the process. They choose not to go to the TRC.
Yeah.
So the option to apologize, the option to recognize error, the option to take responsibility in circumstances of war, if that's what you want to call it, although it's a craven act. But the opportunity is created by the TRC. They choose not to use it. And you choose not to go after them, even when Paul Erasmus has told you the story. And then later, Adrian Flock comes on behalf of everybody, apologizes to you, confesses to you, washes your feet and humbles himself, and you say, that's okay. Yet these people have been involved in a multiple series of ways in just breaking law and taking the law into their own hands. And you are very seriously angry about that. But you choose not to act. Now you come to a different part. There's the TRC. And in chapter 6, no, volume 6 of the Codicil, they make an error. And you deal with this in a chapter, you call it the pain of the error of the TRC. And the error is that there's a man called Lazarus Chikane. There aren't too many Chikanes around, apart from the other one here.
There's one Chikane here,
We went before the TRC and had basically confessed to having murdered a family. And instead of saying Lazarus, they call Lazarus Frank.
They said Frank Chikane.
But you are completely unforgiving of the TRC, and I want to put it to you that there's a contradiction between the way in which you deal with the real agents of apartheid who imposed all of this hardship, and the way in which you went after Archbishop Tutu and eventually Sue de Villiers and so on, who were involved in editing, until they actually fixed it. Isn't there a contradiction in your behavior, Frank?
No. I think there's a way in which we tend to be hard on our own, actually. There is a way. Let me just deal with the Flock issue. I mean, the Flock issue, by the way, by the time we went to the TRC, Flock did not confess this at all. And they had a pact, it's quite clear. They were not going to give information that will implicate other people. And that pact still stands now. They will not give information that will implicate their own people who will then, and they will be called as witnesses to become witnesses. They will not do that. So they held the pact. I had an idea who did it, but I didn't have proof. So in a sense, I didn't go to the Truth Commission because I said, until you know who did it, and we can have that person and the evidence, there's no use me going to the Truth Commission because my story is known. Everybody knows about the story. Then I worked on that story over time. By 2003, I write letters to individuals, the ministers, even the new ministers of police and defense, and I did all sorts of things until I tracked it down to these 3 policemen who did it. And I decoded the names because they had a code, decoded it, and the Erasmus story comes in, and all these Flag Plus people and the prosecution. The story then reaches a stage where there is enough evidence to charge them. And when the prosecution authority took them on, they tried to negotiate, failed. And after failing, they come to the victim to solve the problem. And I happen to be Director General in the President's office. And so they come to me to negotiate this. We prepared to give you all the information, but would like to handle the issue about the prosecution authority. Now, there was another problem. You can read in the book about the prosecution authority and my war with them about the handling of this matter. At the end, they give all the information about me, not about everybody else. And then they do a plea bargaining. I wanted the records in court. you know, until they put it as a record in court, you can't use it because you can be sued. So I wanted it on record in court, and it was put on record. And so, I mean, I had forgiven them a long time ago. By the way, forgiving for me, it's not a problem. I've forgiven them a long time ago. I don't think I want to be bitter. Bitterness affects you. If you don't forgive, it affects you. It doesn't affect the guys who did it. The TRC issue is a different matter. I'm surprised that you've picked it up and contrasted, because it's a different chapter. The TRC issue is that they published this report. And this report says Frank Chikane wiped up a family. It's in Codicil C. You can go and see it.
Yeah.
And
I
when
would
I
have hoped
raised
that Archbishop Tutu remembers who Frank Chikane is.
Yeah. So, I mean, the anger would be that they can't make such a mistake with me. I mean, they can make a mistake about everybody else, but not me. They would know that. They will know that.
Let go of the anger, man.
Yeah, no. So I think the problem is that when I raised it, it was, of course, tracked down. It was a straightforward computer editing problem. They actually edited one name, Frank Chikane, put a reverend, and it changed every Chikane, and put Frank Chikane for every Chikane in the report, including those who did certain things. So the anger I had was really them saying to me, no, the Truth Commission has finished, they have no powers, they can't do anything to change it. I said, yeah. If it was about Archbishop Tutu, they would work overnight to change it today. You know, they won't leave that record. And so my anger was handling it. We resolved it. We had a good meeting with the Archbishop, and we made peace. But even then, it took 4 years before it could be fixed. And that's what really, I mean, it was. No, you can't allow it to.
But Muruti, tell the story. Tell the story. What you made them do was to find every copy of Volume 6.
Yeah.
Print an erratum and take it and avail it to everybody in every library you ever had a copy of.
And they searched for all the copies, and there are still copies that are missing.
You didn't let go.
There are still copies that are missing. And my problem is that, you know, 50 years later, all of us won't be there. But that record will say Frank Chikane wiped out a family. And it's a grievous mistake. I call it a grievous mistake. But I don't think it's contrasting anger, really. I mean, I forgave everybody. I mean, the lady who did it asked for forgiveness about it, and we settled. But no, this is a different issue. Maybe I look like I'm harder on my own than I was with the others. But in fact, it was a different set of debates. But let me just say, the real issue for me, maybe I must say that, the real issue for me is that in the midst of dealing with the Flock van der Merwe story, everybody missed the details in court and focused on the forgiveness story, which was a lovely story. And he washed my feet, by the way. It was tough. By the way, it's very humbling. You think a person who washes your feet is humbled, but it's the person whose feet are washed who's humbled more. Because it was in my office, Director General's office, and I must take out my shoes and socks and let this man wash my feet. I mean, it's quite a serious stuff. But what really for me concerns me is that we missed a number of things. One is that they said there was a list. The National Security Council took a decision. The president gave instructions. The head of the Defense Force had to execute. The Defense Force was going to deal with the external people, and the police, the internal. So I became a project of the police. They formed special units to do it. Then they say there were lists. Nobody in this country has asked, where is the list? Who else has died? Because we know about me because I survived. But who else died? Then in the book, I also decided I will put the list of the chemicals, the orders. They were very good. They signed up for every chemical they used. And so you've got in the Appendix 1 here, in the book, a list of chemicals ordered from March 1989, between March 1989 and October 89. And there are lots of them. It's a whole list. And the one used against me is about number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the list. Nobody has asked in this country. This is in court. It has been submitted there. Nobody has asked, these other chemicals, who were they used against? How many people died? Nobody has asked the question. And the question is, the media missed it as well. I mean, nobody reported about it. And that's why I thought, let me put it in this book so that this country can see what it is about. So my concern is not anger against individuals, because, bitterness destroys you. But for me, it's the issues. It's, did we handle this matter properly? No, we didn't handle it. Government was busy with its own problems. National Prosecution Authority was busy with its own problems. Read the book. You will see how I ended up being on my own, basically. When I went to court in that plea bargaining, I was alone. Nobody went there. Nobody worried about the outcome of that particular process at that point. And that's, for me, you've touched the thing that concerns me more, you see. But in terms of the TRC issue, we finished with the stuff.
Okay, but now I want to provoke you a little bit more, Frank.
Yeah.
You see, I want to go to 8 days.
8 days, yeah.
Okay?
You took my copy.
This is your copy. I just want to... Because now I'm provoking discussion.
Okay.
You see, you refer to that day in September of 2008. Mm-hmm. And this is what you say. With hindsight, those who sat in that lounge reminiscing about the past 24 hours were like the disciples of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion.
That's when Becky was coming back from there.
Yeah. He was a prophet, they said, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. They crucified him, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem us. Of course, Mbeki is not Jesus Christ, but that gathering in that famous lounge, just after the president announced his resignation, brought these thoughts about his disciples to me. I was able to better understand what they went through. That's what you deal with in 8 days.
Yeah.
But you say he's not Jesus Christ.
No, definitely. He's not. Otherwise, I'll get disciplined in my church. I'll be defrocked.
Now I want to go to A to Z.
A to Z.
Now, here you say, there's a book that I consider to be Albert Nolan's classic work.
Now
the book is entitled Jesus Before Christianity.
You have read the book. I think you've read the book.
When I first heard the title, I wondered what Albert Nolan meant. In the book, Nolan managed to make the point that many of us remember the historical man called Jesus from the perspective of the crucifixion, but not the man before the crucifixion. And then you say, I consider Mbeki's HIV and AIDS story to be such an event. Now, I'm provoking this discussion because it's very important. The perspective with which you deal with the man who is your comrade, your friend, your boss, the president. Because this book is about that. This book, as you say, the editors said, well, you can take this book, 8 days, and bury it inside A to Z. So the context is very important. I want to ask whether you weren't too in awe of the individual. That's a question I want to ask about what is actually a very difficult issue. But I think quite important that we talk about, and that's the HIV and AIDS matter. Now let me also provoke, because we lived through this period together. Some of it was very painful. You referred to this pain. Some of the pain was the pain about Madiba in the NEC that comes later.
NEC,
But I want to perhaps invite you to cast your mind back and reorder the way in which your story is written. One of the first issues is we are concerned about what seemed to be something outside of South Africa now beginning to take root, the story of AIDS. And we're grasping at straws because in the world of spies, you know, Le Carré has written The Constant Gardener about how pharmaceutical companies behave in these situations. And so we're clutching at straws, and actually one of the first issues that happens is actually Ngema's Sarafina story.
The Sarafina, yeah.
There's an endeavor to talk to young people in a language that they understand, and if music be that language, then that would be the medium. But the country doesn't understand that. They're not ready for this. They think it's
a waste of money.
It's a waste of money. Why would you produce a musical to talk to young people? So there's already a resistance about issues. Then comes something else, and I put this earlier. I put it where it belongs in 97, as you point out, as you remind us, the Virudin matter.
Virudin matter, yeah.
But by the time Thabo Mbeki is installed as president, inaugurated as president on the 16th of June, 1999, each one of us is wearing a red ribbon. And you make the point that to arrive in any meeting without the symbol,
that you wouldn't survive.
You wouldn't survive. You would be ostracized. But the way in which a story spun out from there became exceedingly difficult. If anybody here took the time and trouble to go and check if there are photo reports of the inauguration of Thabo Mbeki at the Union Buildings, 16th of June 1999, you will see that nobody anywhere close to the podium is not wearing a red ribbon.
They had a red ribbon, yeah.
But what happened? What happened in the course of this? And I'm asking you against the backdrop of my earlier question about what color spectacles you've been wearing about this.
I can see that you're writing a thesis about the book. No, I think it's actually quite interesting that you've contrasted the two issues. I mean, the first, it's really, remember, we do this, the script, we clean it up. He's going to make the speech of his resignation. And he leaves us in a room. He goes and makes the speech. And then he returns. And as I sat in that room, you know, I was describing how the feeling was. It was almost like the disciples sitting there and saying he's crucified. You know what I'm talking about? That's the imagery. And then the other one, which I never thought I would contrast it that way, but that's quite interesting. I mean, the issue about Nolan's book is that his thesis really is that the title is Jesus Before Christianity. He's looking for Jesus before Christianity because after the crucifixion, he's seen through the crucifixion looms and becomes the window through which you understand him. Now, I was saying that the issue about AIDS happened, the crisis happened within a very short time. If you take it from 94 up to 2000, Mbeki was the orthodox chief who forced us. I don't like putting things on labeling myself. I used to put it in the pocket so when he appears, I can plug it quickly. Because he would not accept anybody who works with him. He really campaigned on HIV and AIDS, orthodox, everything, until that fateful October month in 99, when a Smith, I don't know the name, somebody made a statement about rape. And yes, about rape, and Mbeki thought that was suggesting blacks were promiscuous. That's really what he thought. And he made a statement. From there on, the issues about questions on AIDS arose. But even then, up to 2002, we're still doing Virodin, because you can't do Virodin without believing that HIV causes AIDS. You can't do that research. You have to do that research in that direction. And so by 2000, we hit the crisis. By 2001, he's a denialist in terms of the conference he convened. By 2003, we solved the problem. That's how I have understood. We resolved the matter by saying to Mbeki, you've made your point. By the way, he holds very strong views about it. You have made your point. Please allow us to develop a policy that's going to be policy of government. Now, you can go and read the details about it. But what I'm saying is that that period was short, but it looked like everything Mbeki ever did was HIV and AIDS. You know what I'm talking about? Everything. The African Renaissance, program and conflict resolution in the continent. All the other things were completely shaded by this HIV and AIDS. I think that's the imagery I'm trying to use, and maybe I might be misunderstood by using that. Indeed, it was a very difficult time. I was with him all the time. And Mbeki is a researcher. He researches. People who accuse him of playing a scientist. But Mbeki would not accept that if you say nevirapine, use nevirapine, he will say, why was it produced? And you'll Google it. You'll get it in Germany. How is it prescribed in Germany? No, it's not prescribed the way it's prescribed here. Why? And then you go to WHO and find that WHO has actually made a compromise to say for poor countries, you can use it this way, but you can't use it that way for rich countries, because it builds resistance and will create a problem. So that's what Mbeki would get involved and question you about it. And then the more he got attacked, the more he invited the denialists to come and debate this thing. You know what I'm talking about?
I know.
Yeah, and then he gets the denialists and the orthodox people, wants to put them in one room to debate this thing. And that's where I think things went wrong. Because I said, being in that office, the president should never have been the person who invited people for that meeting. It should have been other people. President of a country doesn't do that. So it was a very difficult moment. And that's what I'm describing. I'm not, I have a great respect for Mbeki. I can't deny that. He's a brilliant person. He's extraordinary. When you work with him, you have to cope up with him. In fact, people who say he's not, they say he's not accessible, he's not approachable, he turns people away. It's people who come once, twice, and thrice, they realize they look foolish and they don't go again. You know what I'm talking about?
Ask me. Because
he did
we worked with him, and you kind of needed Bio Plus and Barocca Booster, because he would keep you awake till 4 a.m. debating with you.
Debating with you, yeah. But let me just say the one last thing about this thing, because I can be misunderstood, but I'm trying to get the public out there to understand how the man functioned, because you'll understand him better. We leave him with a speech for Parliament. And in the morning, 7 o'clock, we get a text, it's changed. And then it has got statistics about money flowing from East Germany to West Germany. You'll remember that speech. Lots of numbers, and he's done the computation himself. It's not just extracting from a document, he analyzes it. And it's in the speech. And I said, but we can't have the president making this speech without having checked the numbers. And the only thing we could do between 7 and 9 was for me to use my mathematics and say, check the proportionalities. If he did this and that, does it make sense? And then you found one number, just purely on proportional analysis, that was wrong. And we changed the number. Now, but it's a president.
So it's your maths that caused the trouble, Muruti.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that working with him was a nightmare. And so, in a sense, even when he gets into the HIV and AIDS story, he really goes with boom into it, and it becomes very difficult. But the good news is that in the third chapter, because there are 3 chapters on pharmaceuticals and HIV and AIDS, the last chapter is the one that describes how we turned it around. In 2003, Cabinet adopted a policy. The policy you are using now, that framework was done in 2003. But because the media kept on dealing with him rather than the policy, people think he left whilst we still had a crisis on HIV and AIDS. Actually, we had turned it around, and the program had started operating, and it has been refined now. I think we've got the best policy on HIV and AIDS as we speak now.
Okay, I want to give back to Mervyn. But before doing so, Mervyn, can I ask that we lock the doors and ensure that everybody has bought a copy? It's an amazing book. I mean, the thing that worries Frank is that I've read the book and I recall what was recorded on which page numbers.
Yeah, I noticed.
And I'm saying to you that it's an amazing book, and if you read the two together, then you get a very good sense. But you know, Frank, being the gentleman that he is, doesn't break the secrets. But for one who's been on the inside of this, it's the best account of a very interesting time in the life of this young democracy. Thanks.
Thank you.